Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're from. Good middle of the night, in case you're doing that. Um, it's We're back on for another episode of Ordinary People, and as usual, we have Andrew at the controls. I'm sort of doing something or other, and Neil is back as well, and we have a special guest, Michael Briggs, with us. Neil is going to introduce him. So go ahead, Neil. Thanks.
Yes, good stuff. Thanks, Paul. Good to be back on with you and Andrew again, as normal. And honestly, it's such a delight for me to be able to introduce our guest this evening. Uh, Me and Michael went to school many years ago.
A while ago, yeah.
Um, there is some evidence to show how many years ago that was. Um, But yeah, me and Michael went to school together, and then Michael left Rich Hill. Um, I think when he was 18, we'll find a wee bit more about that. And thankfully, over the last number of years, I've managed to connect with him again a few times because, as we have heard, two episodes out of three, Michael's mum Ruth has been mentioned in glowing terms.
Does she get mentioned a lot?
Oh yeah.
Oh, all right. I'll
So
try and
you're
rectify
you're
that.
you're you're under pressure to hold up to her sterling reputation here,
I
Michael. So
might, I might try and take her down a few pegs if that's all right. Better use of
so Michael, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I know that you're a Man U fan, and you're missing them playing in the FA Cup at the minute.
probably letting him
Um,
go.
but we have, as part of the contract, that we're not allowed to talk about football with Andrew, so we better move swiftly on. Michael, why don't you just for a few minutes, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a wee bit about who you are, early life, um, where you came from, uh, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I am the youngest of three in my family. We grew up in Castle Gardens. You were in Castle Gardens as well, Neil.
Yes,
Uh,
42.
yeah. And so grew up there. And as you said, moved at 18 to Dublin, which was initially meant to be a year out scheme. So I did 1 year out volunteering in a youth centre, and then I just stayed in Dublin since then. Now I'm married to one wife, and we have one son who's 6, and we're living in Bray, just below Dublin. I currently do 2 jobs. One job I work with Christian Aid as their, I suppose I work with supporters and churches all around the country talking about international development. And then my other job is helping to run a church, which I do with my wife, Belinda. So she does most of the heavy lifting. And I tune in for a few hours and do a few bits and pieces there as well. So that keeps us kind of busy.
Yeah.
As you say, I'm a football fan. I'm a fan of reading. Yeah. I don't know what else you want to know about me.
No, that's good. No, thanks for that. I'm sure we'll pick up some uh, bits and pieces as we go along. I suppose for my interest too, as much as anybody else's, is you went to Dublin for a year out. What was it that kept you there?
Um, is it bad if I say my wife? No. Well, actually, no. The first year I stayed there, we weren't going out at that point. Why did I stay? I think going to Dublin was a bit of fresh air for me,
Yeah.
and it was a totally different world. And I just loved the people who I mixed with, and loved what I was doing. So when I first went down, we were actually it was a youth centre, so we did like homework clubs and things like that. But we also ran an under 18s nightclub. No alcohol, no drugs, not officially anyway. People would try and smuggle them in, but
Oh, really?
So I was on the door searching the men or the boys as they came in. I would have to search them to make sure they didn't have drugs or alcohol or weapons.
Really?
And then we would have 3 or 4 nights or 3 or 4 hours on a Saturday night with about 200 to 300 under 18s in the hall. And that was kind of our main event. And yeah, again, I just loved kind of mixing with all the people, getting to know them. And I suppose I stayed for that and stayed for them. Yeah.
Sharp contrast from village life here.
It's very sharp, yeah. Yeah. I remember my first night helping at the nightclub just being, it was a bit like shock and awe. Because the music was so loud. The young people were barely dressed at all. Yeah, it was just nothing like I'd experienced. And then you had fights, and we had the guards on speed dial all the time.
Wow.
Because you were dealing with a lot of fights and violence and all of that. So you had to get used to being ridiculed and spat on and punched and not being able to retaliate.
My goodness.
But it was really good. I can 100% say I would never want to do it again. While also saying I absolutely loved it. And I'm so glad that we did it for I think I did it for about 18 months until we eventually closed our doors on that event.
It's funny listening to that, because while you're doing that, you're 18 down in Dublin, and I'm involved in youth work at the same time in Rich Hill, and we're getting our knickers in a twist because somebody said the E04.
Oh, there was plenty of that, yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier, actually. Have you turned 36 yet?
Have I turned 36? I did, October.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So only from the point of view that you've now probably spent more time in Dublin than you were here in Rich Hill.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I did actually think that as that kind of marker came up. I was kind of like, oh, now I've spent just as much time.
And is there any part of here that, be aware that there is people from Rich Hill listening, we hope. Is there any part of Rich Hill still feels like home?
Yeah, I think Rich Hill feels, I think I get a lot of nostalgia probably.
Yeah.
And it's probably like I love going up. I still call Rich Hill home, so I love going up home. And yeah, I just love being able to see everywhere, and like I can stand on my parents' front door and just look out at the houses and the fields and just stand there for 20 minutes or more, and just looking perfectly happy. And so yeah, like I just love all of that, and Rich Hill has a lot of good memories for me. Like I would say I was truly blessed by my upbringing there, with family and with friends and neighbours and everyone. Like I don't have any I've nothing to hold against it. So yeah, no, it does still have a special place for me. I was laughing the other day. My son now corrects me. So I've been doing his homeschooling, and one of the harder things to do actually is the Irish, because I don't have a word of Irish.
Oh, right.
And I'm having to homeschool him in learning Irish. But he's also taken to just correcting my English when I speak. Because of my accent. So he'll hear a word that I say and he'll be like, no, that's not the way you say that. And trying to correct me. So the accent hasn't fully gone yet, although I know when I talk to people from up north, they say it's gone.
Oh yeah, it definitely does.
From down here, definitely not gone at all.
I think Andrew might have a memory from years back. You have good memories of primary school, don't you?
Yeah, it's just this lovely play that we did. I saw recently, it was around Christmas time, they were saying that kids who played Joseph Yeah, it's a lovely photo. Kids who played Joseph or Mary in the play in school were destined to have higher paying jobs.
Oh,
And
really?
I wondered whether the same was true of this photograph, because you're the owl
Uh-huh.
in the Owl and the Pussycat. You've got a lead role there. I'm the pig. I still remember my line. Oink
Do
oink
you?
oink oink. I will give you this ring off my
Wow.
nose.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I wasn't a big fan of drama, I have to say. But school was good in Hardy Memorial. They were
And
good
then
times.
where did you go after Hardy?
So I went to Armagh Royal.
Uh-huh.
And stayed there to my GCSEs, and then I went to Armagh Tech
Okay.
to do A levels, and then from there to Dublin. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, so I'd love you to talk a wee bit more, like just talk a wee bit about your first 18 years there in a bit of a nutshell, I suppose.
Yeah.
Just love you to speak a bit more about about your career and your passions. I'd love you to tell us a wee bit about Christian Aid. I don't know how many of us down here will be overly familiar with the work of Christian Aid. I know that you are passionate about it. It's not just a career for you. So maybe tell us a wee bit about that.
Yeah. So I have been in Christian Aid now since 2012. I started in Christian Aid, and actually before that, like I trained as a youth worker. And got a diploma in youth work, and then I did a degree in theology. And coming out of my theology course, I was wondering what to do, and because what do you do a theology degree? I mean, it's kind of pointless. So I I eventually applied for a job with what was called Irish Aid, which is actually the Irish government's overseas development program. So it's the
Okay.
official overseas development program with the Irish government. And so I applied for a role with them that was basically working with schools, so talking in schools about development. And I did that for 2 years. And then the Christian Aid job came up, and I jumped over. And I have to say, when I started with Christian Aid, I'd heard of them, but I didn't know a huge amount.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been impressed while I've been there, although, like, for anyone listening, obviously I'm biased because I work there. But I have been hugely impressed with the way they work. So they're trying to end poverty, or one of, and there's an awful lot of organizations who are doing the same thing, and we're working together with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we work all around the world. And I suppose what I like about Christian Aid is we really focus on systems and laws that keep people in poverty. So trying to overturn or change systems and laws that keep people in poverty. So we've worked a lot with tax, particularly in Ireland, because in Ireland we have a dodgy tax system where companies can move their money through without paying much. So we have worked a lot there to try and change the tax laws in Ireland, and we've had some big successes, even though we're quite small.
Mm-hmm.
And we would work with gender-based violence as well, again all around the world. So some of that is in other countries, helping to mobilize people to change laws or to change the way things are, to educate people in terms of gender-based violence. I've been blessed to be able to travel with Christian Aid twice. I went to Kenya once, which was I really love Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular. Almost feels like a home away from home for me in some ways, and so that was great. And then I went to India, and India really had a big impact on me as well. A country that, in economic terms doesn't look that bad, but the caste system is just so shocking.
Yeah.
And the number of Dalits being the lowest caste, who are just trampled on. So Christian Aid were working there mostly with human rights lawyers to stand up for Dalit people, because not very many people are. standing up for them. So it's had a real impact on my life, Christian Aid, and impacted the way I've kind of thought about development and poverty as well. It's been really good.
Two places. It's hard not to be impacted by those places. I've visited Kenya and India. I suppose the challenge for me is like really good hearing a bit more about Christian Aid and some of the reason why you're passionate about that, Michael. Because I think sometimes, and it's not exactly what we spoke on last week with the guys, but sometimes we can be guilty of just like arriving into places like that and handing out our food parcels and giving our stuff as a nice gesture, but actually there's not. I don't think. Maybe just a personal opinion. I just don't think there's enough people like talking about the systems as you're talking about, as you're saying.
I was talking to one of our. So in Christian Aid, we work around the world, but we work through local partnerships. So we don't employ like people from Ireland to go to Kenya and sort something out. Rather, it's local people in Kenya who come up with their ideas. But I was talking to one of our staff in Sierra Leone, so they're from Sierra Leone, but they were telling me that in one of their villages, they went to visit this project that was being run in the village, and when they arrived, they saw that there was 20 brand new outdoor toilets, and they were like, "Oh, look at these, brand new outdoor toilets," and they asked them about them, and the person in the village said, "Oh yeah, this group came from overseas, and they said they were going to build us toilets, so they built us toilets." And they were like, "Oh, that's great." And they were like, "Yeah, we didn't really need toilets, so we wanted a barn, but they insisted that they were going to build toilets, so they built toilets, but we just used them as barns." And she said, so she went down all the outdoor toilets and opened the doors, and behind each door there was just like seeds and the stuff that you would find in a barn. And but it's like, that's your example. A group goes over and decides, we're going to build you toilets. The village say, "Oh, we want a barn," which you could build them, but you insist on building the toilets that they never need nor want. That sort of stuff happens all the time.
I suppose from our point of view, whether it's through drop-in or through Grace Community Church, our heart is always to partner with the people that are on the ground. This idea of just empowering local people is it's incredibly important. I suppose we think it's important because that's what Jesus came to do. I think he came to empower people, and he seemed to always be at the margins with those considered the least. And so then a bit more locally, you're involved in lots of stuff in Dublin, and again, I know you're passionate about the stuff that's going on in and around you. So tell us a bit about Urban Junction, Ignite, on all that you're involved in.
We have numerous names which get kind of confusing. Urban Junction and Ignite, they're kind of one and the same thing. So when I first came down to Dublin 18 years ago or whatever, to do the nightclub, that under 18s nightclub has essentially morphed into a church, which is the church that we now run, myself and my wife. It's I love it. It really, I mean, I know people often talk of church as family, but it really does feel like family to me. And I love the diversity that we have in terms of backgrounds, and people from different economic backgrounds and different faith backgrounds. We still have some people who come to our church who tell me they're not Christians and have no interest in being Christians, but it seems like a nice place to hang out on Sunday morning or something. I don't know. Which is lovely as well. And so I really love that community that we have. I suppose like my main passion, so my main role there is to do with theology. So it's kind of guiding the teaching that we do, but it's also guiding theology in terms of who we are, what we care about, what we're focused on. And yeah, like I'm particularly passionate about theology, and increasingly so about kind of public theology. So, you know, being able to hear, as we talk about hearing from people, but to be able to kind of hear voices and let numerous voices from numerous backgrounds all feed in to a conversation, which I think is really important. So, like we have our church Sunday morning thing. Obviously, lockdown and COVID has changed quite a lot of it. So that happens on Zoom currently. And then we have numerous different groups and things that run out of our church as well. So particularly before COVID, we were very focused on being out in communities. So pretty much everyone who came to our church was out doing something during the week somewhere, whether that was at a local prison or university, or we have men's sheds, we have support groups for women going through divorce, we have, you know, various meetings going on in pubs or in, you know, wherever, and everyone was kind of involved in that sort of stuff. COVID's changed that a little bit, although I have to say a lot of people are still finding ways to figure it out and to do stuff. It's just part of our DNA at this point, part of our culture is to always think outside the building, and to be outside the building. I've been involved then in, I suppose it's my links to theology. Like we have a group called Impasse that meets, that I'm very passionate about, and it's kind of like a Bible study, except we say it's an impasse because we never get to an answer. It's a place where people can share their doubts and their questions without fear that people will think they're backsliding. You can ask any question you want, and we'll answer it for a while, and then we'll question the answers that we've given, and we'll end up in an impasse. And then I've also...
Mike, would you mind just pausing there just for a moment? Like, I know it's not that you haven't explained it well, but I just am so intrigued by that. I remember you telling me about it a while back. Like, just flesh it out a wee bit more if you could. Like, just what that, just like a typical night, just what that looks like.
We always say that, our night always begins with cheese, because it's all about cheeses. So we normally when we met in person, we would have just a table covered with cheese, and the night would begin by eating cheese. And once we had our fill of cheese, we would come up with a topic beforehand. So on the topic, you know, sometimes we've read books together. Sometimes we've just come up with a topic. You know, we might come up with a topic like why blood is important in the Old Testament, or violence in the Old Testament, or you know, something like that. And we basically just sit down, and nobody leads the conversation. People just start to throw out their questions, and we just chat. So it's very informal, and it's very easy. Normally we meet at like about 8, and at about a quarter to 10, I'll try to bring a halt to the proceedings, no matter where we are, and we pray for each other then just at the end. So we just pray, you know, that whatever we've talked about, that you know, that essentially we're praying that we'll be able to live out whatever we've been talking about in some ways, or find the truth that we're looking for. Again, it comes down to listening to people's opinions and valuing their thoughts on theology as well. There's this phrase I've heard before that all theology has an adjective, which is to say that there is no theology that is just pure, that anyone can have. Like, I can just hold a pure theology that is untainted, because it's intimately connected with who I am. So my theology has Rich Hill running through its blood, and it has the fact that I'm white running through its blood, and it has the fact that I'm a man running through its blood, and that I'm middle class, That all affects the way that I see the world, and it does affect the way that I read the text, and the way that I interact with theology. So, so the best way that I can see then to deal with that is to be able to talk it out with a diverse group of people, with people who aren't like me, who will look at the same text that I look at and will come at it from a totally different angle, and to let them tell me about what that angle looks like. It's not to say that I don't believe there's any truth. I do believe there's truth. I mean, ultimate truth. I do believe that's there, but I believe we can only really see that, you know, if we get as many angles and viewpoints as we can gather, we start to be able to see, okay, you know, what's real and what can we maybe leave by the wayside. I mean, take for example swearing, as you mentioned at the start there. So
excuse me, never said nothing.
Oh, you said that I think you said your young people were swearing a lot in Richhill.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Well, my ones in Dublin were very nice. So take for example swearing. So I growing up, my parents raised me wonderfully, and so I never really swore much. Swearing wouldn't be something that I would have done a lot. I come down to Dublin and I'm doing Bible studies with kids who are swearing every second or third word, and they're not doing it to try and agitate me. They're not doing it to annoy me. They're just doing it because it's part of their language. Now, I would have grown up kind of going, oh no, swearing's really bad. You know, perhaps swearing's a sin and we shouldn't do it and we should ask for forgiveness. But then seeing it from their angle, it alters it a little bit, because I'm like, okay, well, actually, this is just just the way they talk, and this is just, you know, where they're from and you know, where they've been brought up, and it's different to me, and it might make me feel uncomfortable, but they can equally look at the text and find stuff and find truths about God and explain those, albeit with a few swear words. So, you know, it's that sort of thing that maybe changes when you get to see someone else's viewpoint. I think it's a big one for me is, the kind of male viewpoint, I think, affects me a lot in terms of how I read the Bible. So, like, I love to get that female perspective in terms of what the text says and what it means. It's so important to hear. I think especially as a male church leader, it's really important to hear the female perspective. So
it's just like, I love that, Michael. Thank you for that. Just a couple of quick examples that I read in a commentary in the Book of Acts recently by a black theologian, William James Jennings, and it was remarkable just what you're saying there. It's really cool hearing you saying that, because it probably just puts words to like some of the feelings I was having reading through it. Like, it was just a perspective in some of this that I would never have seen reading it by myself. And I shared it with the guys during the week. A guy in the States who has a disability, and he's talking through how he sees the banquet table in Luke 14. And he's bringing stuff out of that as a disabled person that, like, I just never would have seen. And I'm just fascinated by that, by what you're doing down there. And I'm like, sometimes I wonder how that would transfer down here, whether it is different down where you are than down here. Because I think we really struggle not to sort of like tie something up, put a bow on it, and like that's it. There's your answer. You've given all your perspectives now. Here comes the man at the front to come and tell you what it all really means. You know what I mean? And I think and if we don't have that, if we're left at the end with no certainty, if there's still doubt, it just causes panic. You know what I mean? It's like we've no space for any of that.
I think I'm so comfortable in grey, and I find myself really comfortable in doubt as well. And I don't know. I blame my mum maybe for that. I'll take her down a peg there. No, I've no example. I'll just blame her.
Any chance to get a dig in with your mum? That's awful.
So I'm super comfortable in grey and in the possibility of not knowing, and I'm okay with that. Like from a scriptural point of view, I'm okay with that because I suppose I don't see why I should know everything. I'll go and read the end of Job and see how God takes down Job and outlines how he doesn't have a clue. And for me, so I do have to live out obviously what I believe, and I suppose that's the important part then is how I live that out, or how I live out my faith is the important bit. Rather than being able to kind of put a bow on something and say this is the exact right answer. Like I do the teaching. I do the teaching in the church. I suppose I lead the teaching in our church. Now we have, again, because we like to hear a lot of different voices, we have upwards of maybe 12 to 15 people who will all teach. All different backgrounds again and ages and but what I'm constantly saying in our church, and people probably get annoyed with it, is that the talks on a Sunday morning are not the answer. They are the start of a conversation.
Very good.
So the person who does the talk, they put work into it, and I know I do a few of them, and it does take a lot of work, and you put effort into it, but there's still the chance that I might give a talk on a Sunday morning and there might be someone sitting listening to me who has a different perspective because they have a different experience, or because they've actually spent an awful lot of time looking at this particular passage over the years, so they have different views on it. And so what I'm constantly saying is this is a conversation starter. I'll deliver the talk, and then we have time at the end of the service to chat about it. I encourage people to chat to family, during the week. We would put stuff up on social media from our church during the week to kind of hint people towards thinking about it again. And it can even just be a conversation in your own head, a conversation starter. So I'm essentially saying, listen to the talk, listen to whoever is speaking and what they have to say, and
very good.
Question it and think about it and mull it over.
I'm totally stealing that every Sunday now. The boys will get sick of hearing me saying it. The talks are not the answer, they're the start of the conversation. That's really important. And so in terms of living it out, and I think the language you guys use is small communities or micro churches. Is that the language you use?
Yeah, we've jumped around with lots of different language. Micro churches has been used in the past. And small communities. I suppose we tried to essentially split our church up into small groups of people who would meet during the week or who would do something and together and would gather in those ways. They are groups that are sometimes they come together just geographically. So it might be a load of people from one town or one area. Sometimes they come together because of interests. We have guys who meet together who all play music and they gather to play music together or whatever. So there could be a similar interest thing. And I suppose we want those groups gather together to support each other, yes, but mostly we're looking those groups to be kind of outward focused. Not in the sense that they're looking for people to catch and make them pray a prayer, but in the sense that they're trying to improve wherever they're at, whatever community they're in, they're just trying to make it better. So if they're a community group, they may be doing stuff in their neighborhoods to try and bring people together. If they're a group that has a certain interest, they might, try and pull in other people into that group just to improve lives. It's not about, I know sometimes when I talk about this in some churches, it can sound like we're avoiding the gospel or something, or we're avoiding bringing a message, which isn't true. I think we've always kind of said, no, we'll be clear about who we are. But it's about kind of realizing that maybe what God is doing is bigger than just giving people tickets to go to heaven. Maybe what God is doing is a redemptive process that involves the whole world and pulls everything back together again. And if God is doing that redemptive process of renewing the whole world, and the image we have in Scripture is not of God's people one day leaving the earth. And, a lot of it is really about doing that as well. It's about empowering local people. It's about empowering people in our church as well, and kind of saying, look, if you want to lead something, if you're passionate about something, just go and do it, and we'll back you. We'll give you some money if you need some money to start something up. We'll, give you space if you need space, or, you need resources. We'll be there. If you need training, we'll find training. We'll get training. Just go and do it. And it's in that process then that people also grow, or we find that people grow.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was as we were talking about that in Kenya and Uganda, I still was hoping that we would bring it round to is what you guys are doing in Dublin. And I don't even know if you know the tagline on your website, but that idea of in response to God's love for all humanity, for all people, our hope and desire is to see every part transformed by Jesus.
Yeah.
And some of the language you use is clearly seeing, empowering local people for whatever part of society they have any influence over, and I think it's really good. And so obviously this pandemic has affected us all to varying degrees. So could you just speak for a few minutes, Michael, just on how that's impacted church, or just you, family, whatever, just the challenges or the highs and the lows of lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, look, it certainly provided lots of challenges. I think it has provided lots of highs as well for us. I mean, for our church, we've still gathered, and we still pretty much have, all the people who are normally there with us on Zoom on Sundays. And a lot of people, as I said before, have just found ways to continue to do stuff. So we have a number of people who are very involved in a project that's called Serve the City in Dublin. It's not particularly faith-based, but it's an organisation that goes and serves people all around Dublin. And basically anyone can volunteer with them. So you can volunteer with them, and you might be painting a wall in someone's house, or you might be delivering food, or doing someone's shopping, whatever it is. And so during the first lockdown, or back in April, May time, they were making up, I think, about 100 to 150 food packages every week and delivering them out to people in the local area. And there was a lot of people from our community that were involved in that in particular. And then people have just found ways to do stuff in their local areas as well. Like, we have definitely found in our neighbourhood, in our state, like, our relationships with our neighbours has improved tenfold during lockdown, during COVID. And like, we did simple things, like we texted all our neighbours and said, do you want to have a coffee on a Saturday at 3 out in your front garden? So everyone just goes out to their front garden at 3 on a Saturday, and we just kind of talk to each other. We're distant, we're not sharing cups, or everyone's just making their own coffee. We did, back in the June bank holiday, we got everyone in our cul-de-sac. We have a little cul-de-sac here of probably about could be a dozen, maybe slightly over a dozen houses, but we got everyone to bring their barbecues out to the front garden. And we had a proper barbecue session from about 3 p.m. until I think I came into the house about 1 a.m. But again, it was just all the neighbours all outside.
Yeah.
And then during Christmas there, my my wife and myself helped to organise we knew some trumpet players. So we got some trumpet players to come and play carols just at the edge of the estate for just half an hour. Some carols playing in the estate, and then off they go. So things like that have been really good in terms of just getting to know neighbours and hopefully trying to improve their lives a little bit. And yeah, like I definitely feel like our relationships with all of them are much improved from where they were beforehand. Not that they were bad beforehand. But no, we're just we all kind of know each other now.
Very good.
So yeah, like all of that's been really good. And I mean, it's been hard, and definitely within our church, you know, there's been some of our congregation or our members who have had a really particularly hard time during COVID. There's been a few people who have had we haven't had any deaths since COVID started, but we had a couple of deaths just before it started. But it's been difficult then for them to deal with the grieving process without people around them. And then there's been mental health challenges. There's been some significant enough mental health challenges and things like that. But I suppose, like we've been spending years dismantling the idea that that the person at the front will solve all your problems if you call them, or with their talk on a Sunday morning. So we've been chipping away at that wall for a long time. So the great thing over this time has been how much everyone just invests. And it's not, I mean, sometimes me and B are doing stuff for people. Yeah, of course we are. And, you know, we're doing as much as we can. But there's so many other people in our congregation who are stepping up to go and call people, to drop packages to people's houses, to, you know, help in any way that they can. So that's exactly what I want. I want them to do all the work. So
Yes. Come on. That's really good. Just as I'm listening to you talk about serving the city, and that's a thread that's definitely been picked up with a few people. Just that idea of like a better, more significant relationships with neighbours. It just leads me on, Michael, just the last few minutes of the risk of sounding like a stalker. I've listened to you a few times now. That a podcast you did, I think it must have been last year, and you used this line in the middle of it talking about Jeremiah 29, either we prosper together or not at all.
Yeah.
It's that line is just stuck with me. And it's like I really find that interesting. It's probably one of those things that I throw out and say like, this don't have any answers, but like, let's talk about this conversation starter. So lead the conversation on a bit for us.
Yeah, that was actually, it was so when COVID all hit, I'll tell you where I was. I was on holiday in Portugal in Lisbon. So me and B and Nathan headed off to Portugal, I think just before St. Patrick's Day. And so we were in Lisbon watching the Taoiseach close the country down, kind of wondering whether we should rebook our flights to get home. And we got home eventually, and the talk on Jeremiah 29 was the first one I did then at the start of our kind of lockdown. And I chose it in particular because Jeremiah 29 is that famous, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to help you prosper, etc., etc. Very famous verse that people often quote, and often quote in difficult times. And so I wanted to say that to everyone, but to also say, in the context of Jeremiah 29, the people who God is speaking to here are being brought into slavery. They've been captive. And God is saying, I know the plans I have for you, plans to help you prosper, but he's also going to tell them that they're going to be slaves for the next 2-3 generations.
Yeah.
So the people who he's even talking to are not going to find freedom, not in their lifetime. It's going to be their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. And it felt appropriate to talk about that at the start of COVID because we didn't know where all this was going. And I didn't want to stand up in front of everyone and say, here, it's all going to be fine. God's going to help us to prosper. But what I wanted to say was that, yeah, God is redeeming the world. And we believe that. And no matter what that means for us in the next year, and whether some of us, you know, we have healthcare workers in our congregation, and, you know, you're saying, okay, you might go through hell for the next few months, few years, who knows? But we can hold on to the fact that God is redeeming. And so a part of then what Jeremiah goes on to say, or God goes on to say to the people in Jeremiah, is that they will prosper if they help the Babylonians to prosper. The Babylonians who have taken them captive and are now treating them as slaves. God says to them, oh, actually, if these guys who took you captive prosper, you'll prosper as well. And again, that kind of linked into COVID, because at the start of all this, it became very clear that in a sense, like none of us had any real protection. You know, we didn't know where the virus was or how it would affect us or who it would affect and when. Now, obviously, there are, and I'll bring in my Christian Aid stuff. Obviously, you know, we might say that we're all in the same sea, but some of us are in better boats. So obviously, some of us have better protection than others. But there was a sense in which we all have to prosper together at the start of this. And I think that still exists. You know, COVID's always going to be here unless we solve it for everyone. And maybe as long as it's here, it's always going to be a problem. Which means even as the Western countries buy up all the vaccines and vaccinate all their people, the poorer countries who don't get any vaccines, you know, it may actually become a problem for the Western countries again. It doesn't automatically solve it. And there's a sense in which actually we all need to prosper. We all need to look out for each other. And that goes beyond even our own church. Yeah, I mean, in our church, we want to look after each other. But, you know, let's look after our neighborhoods. Let's look after our you know, our Muslim neighbors and our humanist neighbors and our Buddhist neighbors or whoever. You know, let's actually say, we're all, you know, going to look after each other. And we're not going to favor just Christians. And so that was, I suppose it's been something that, you know, off the back of that, we've really kind of gone down that line as a church then. You know, we've kind of, as I said, with a lot of the other things that we're doing, you know, we are very focused on the people outside our building. I remember before COVID, when we were still in the building, we had talked about putting some, like an inscription up above our door saying, you're now entering the place of worship, but we wanted it on the inside. So as you're walking out the door, above the door, it says you're now entering the place of worship. Because we worship outside our building. And we worship by sacrificially loving our neighbours. And so that's what we're kind of encouraging people to do all the time.
Yeah, we'll steal that too.
Well, if you get into your building and paint it above your door before we do.
And just finally on that talk, I had listened to you at the same time that Andrew's wife Lila had spoke to our church family, cracking message a number of weeks back. but you use similar language when you say that God's not calling us to escapism, but He's rather to find resilience in the midst of the trial.
Yeah.
And the best growth comes from persevering through the trials, not escaping from them. And I find it really helpful, Michael, because sometimes you can find yourself around sort of charismatics. Sometimes get a wee bit too triumphalist for me. Sometimes it's awful to say that, maybe, but like we're so much about like getting over this, getting through this, overcomers, all of that. It's almost like we're fear just like going through this and persevering through this together. And so that idea of like God's not calling us to escape the same way that you were taking that from Jeremiah 29, not calling us to escape, but rather to find resilience in the midst of the trial. And so I think that's a really good word for where we're at the minute.
There's a quote that's been rattling around my head for a while. From a Bulgarian writer called Maria Popova, and she says that critical thinking without hope is cynicism, and hope without critical thinking is naivety. And I really like that line. So, like often in Christian churches, obviously we talk about hope, and hope is something that we have to offer the world. But our hope should not be detached from reality, and our hope should not be void of critical thinking, because then it just becomes naivety. We just we skip through the meadow, but equally kind of seeing that actually hope is really important to the world around us, and that critical thinking without hope just becomes cynicism.
Good.
And like COVID's been a challenge. We have also in Ireland, like and I don't know what it's like in Northern Ireland, but there's the constant relationship of church and state is a struggle, not in terms of there being much of a relationship now, but in terms of what has been in the past. And recently there was the report on the mother and baby homes, which is just absolutely shocking to read. And there's a sense in which I think the churches in Ireland need to be able to look at that reality and not ignore it. And we need to confess and seek forgiveness of the people for what has happened there. And so there's that constant struggle of kind of talking about hope, but also kind of going, well, this is the reality of where we are, and we can't ignore that or just depart from it. And again, it comes down to what we believe God is doing. And if God isn't just providing an escape route, but that God is actually redeeming the world, then we need to be in the world. And we need to be next to our neighbours, and we need to hear the cries of the poor, and we need to hear the cries of the minority groups. I'm constantly saying that one of my biggest annoyances of the church is that the time when I normally hear the church speak out on a public forum is when it seems like their rights are being taken away or challenged. I rarely hear the church speak out on a major public forum for the minority or for the group who's being trampled on, and that annoys me, because that is what the church should be doing. The church should be knowing who the minorities are, hearing their voices, and pointing everyone to listen to them. Is what the church should be doing.
Very good. You remind me of, I'd really recommend a conversation between Brooksy Cavey and Andy Stanley. And the conversation went very wide, but like Andy Stanley said, pretty much just what you said, different language. Just like once the church puts themselves in a posture of winning, we've lost. And like he was really vocal then about all the places we've tried to find ourselves in a posture of power,
Yeah.
And whenever you do that with the church, we've lost.
And that's what we see in America, perhaps at the minute, and that's what we've seen in Ireland in the past, 30, 40 years ago. The church in Ireland was at the top table in terms of power, and it abused that power, and it abused it so that it could stay in power. It used whatever might it had to stay at the top table. And actually, you know what? Praise Jesus that it's been knocked off the top table, and thank God that it's not there, because the church should never be seeking the place of power. It's not its role.
Yeah, good word. In fact, two more quick questions from me. Just when you've talked about hope, Michael, is there any sort of concrete or aspirational hopes that you have for your community and for what's going on in and around you?
We do dearly hope to be able to actually meet together in the same room sometime. That would be just lovely. My hope is constantly just to get people thinking about their faith and doing their best to live out what they know and what they can now. So, it's constantly just about pushing people to that place.
Brilliant. And finally, this is really important. Is there anything that you're watching, reading, or listening to that you would highly recommend that we must engage with?
I do read a lot. So I normally read about 4 or 5 books at the same time. And actually since March, I started reading poetry. And I've never read poetry much before. But actually it was a guy, I don't know if you know him, Padraig O'Tuma. He's a Cork man based in Belfast though. And he writes poetry. He has a podcast called
On Being.
It's done with On Being. Yeah, it's called Poetry Unbound.
Oh yes, sorry.
And it's little 10-minute reflections with a poem that are just wonderful. So I've been listening to them, and then I started reading poetry and just loving it. Mary Oliver in particular. I don't know what I did with my life before Mary Oliver. Reading and watching. I suppose a lot of what I actually have. I love dark humor, so in particular that's where I love. So stuff like Catch-22 would be maybe one of my favorite books ever, because I love the humor there. We just recently watched a series on Netflix called Back to Life. That was very good. Nice little 6-episode, 20 minutes long, 2 hours.
Oh. Brilliant.
And it's about a woman who has been in prison for murder, and then she's returning to her small village as a convicted murderer. And so it's a comedy. Yeah. But it's very good. And listening, I've been listening to, I have to confess, I don't often listen to Christian music at all, except when I'm in church. But I have been listening to a band called The Brilliants, who are wonderful. They certainly are Christian leaning anyway, not the type of songs that you would be singing in church. They're fantastic music. So I recommend Brilliance to you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Paul, Andrew, anything from you guys before we wrap up?
Yeah, I've seen that show too, Back to Life. I think it was on TV at one stage, but it's really good.
Yeah, it might have been. It was really good. I did laugh out loud quite a few times.
Yeah, very good. Recommended.
Paul, I seen Paul was disgusted there, Michael, when you said you don't listen to Christian music.
I'm going to be involved in worship in our church, and I don't listen to Christian music either. So it's always.
I need something a bit more rocky, like, you know. I either listen to quite loud kind of rock or instrumental. I love just instrumental. Give me instrumental day of the week.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about how it'd be cool to sort of maybe write a few psalms. You know, like kind of, I always think they're kind of like the blues of the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, they're pretty depressing.
Yeah.
But they're very uplifting at the same time. So it's kind of like, that's why people like the blues, because they can go, yeah, I feel like I've been hit in the head as well. So
I was going to say, you should. What's the psalm about bashing children's heads against rocks? You could write that one.
that'll be the B-side then.
Michael, thank you so much. Honestly, I really love that. There's probably 3 or 4 times we could have just went down a few different rabbit holes, but really enjoyed what we covered and found it really helpful, and I really value your time. And even though you've lived now down south longer than you've lived here, still count you as a rich hill boy. So
yeah, I am. I look forward to getting up and meeting you in person again. Soon.
Good man. And you'll walk into our building when we've got that inscription up before you have.
Yeah, I'll bring some paint with me to paint over it.
Ordinary People was hosted by Neil Dawson. It was produced, edited and engineered by Andrew Gribbon and Paul Woods. Head over to ordinarypodcast.com for show notes, links, previous episodes and all the ways you can contact the show. See you next time.